Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven, and our guest today is Jenn Lim. She is the co-founder, CEO, and I love this, Chief Happiness Officer of a company delivering happiness, a company she co-founded with Tony Hsieh, the late CEO of Zappos.com, to create more happiness at work in life. So Jenn was a consultant, among other things that she's done at Zappos from 2003 to 2011, during the years in which it grew into being a billion-dollar business. She created the first of several Zappos Culture books, and she's the author now of a book titled Beyond Happiness: How Authentic Leaders Prioritize Purpose and People for Growth and Impact. It's available now, and it just hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list last week. So with that, congrats and welcome to the podcast, Jenn.
Thank you for that. Thank you for having me. An honor to be here. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, and you can learn more about Jenn at jennlim.com. It's Jenn with two N's. I'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes. So again, jennlim.com. I do want to say also, in your bio, it references the passing of Tony Hsieh, and I want to express my condolences to you. And I know we're coming up on about 1 year anniversary of his passing. So I know there's a lot of people who will be thinking of him.
Yeah, thank you for expressing that and knowing, just acknowledging that it's almost been a year, which is pretty crazy to think about. But I think it's all been an important part of where we are in life and how we've all been dealing with a sense of grief and loss. So thank you for bringing that up.
Sure. And there's a lot that you've shared, that you've written, and I saw a photo of the two of you on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. You referred to him as your partner in positivity, which is a great phrase as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's been a lot of conversation, media out there. It's been a very public passing, as some of, as you and some of your audience might know, but it's also been a part of me processing, and because he passed 5 weeks right before I was supposed to have this book due. Mm-hmm. And so it really thrust me to a different place in getting the book out in a way that I can express it the best way I can.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Moving forward with the book, I know that's going to help a lot of people, and I'm sure it already is. So, as we're going to come back and talk about the book, of course, and the idea of delivering happiness. But as we always do here on the podcast, we like to build the episode around a favorite mistake story. So, Jenn, looking back at the things you've done, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
Yeah, I thought about this question. It's like, I thought I was going to do something around the business sphere of things, but I actually went a little farther back. And it was when I was just getting my, legs on the ground of what I'm going to do with my life. And this was after the .com busted and I got swept in that whole wave, late 90s, money, title, status was easy, thought I had it made. And then I got laid off. And so I lost my job. 9/11 happened. I realized my dad had colon cancer and he eventually passed. And so all these things happened basically in 1 year. And so I just knew I didn't want to go back to where I came from. And I started doing something I didn't think that would be like a job or a career. And I started writing. And I started writing about all the things that I absorbed through the .com days. And eventually the book, it was a novel. I called it the Direction Deficit Disorder at that time, because there was clearly a lot of that going on. And thanks to my friend for helping me just massage through that whole ordeal. But it was insane because I started writing. I was like maybe 3-4 chapters in, and people were asking what I'm doing. So I sent it to my ex-partner, meaning like at KPMG, he's a senior manager type of thing. He read it. And then I also just as if I pretended I didn't know what it meant to be a first-time writer, sent it to agents. And they all really wanted it. And it was insane. So, wow. Yeah. And so fast forward, I was in this meeting I had this guy, this ex colleague of mine that said, "Hey, Lionsgate wants to option your book," and reminding that this was like 3-4 chapters in. And then on the
And
other end,
Lionsgate, sorry to interrupt, that's a movie studio production company, right?
right, yeah, So I was just, yeah. So I was like, okay. And then on the other end was an agent, Deborah Schneider. She had just sold, if you remember, The Devil Wears Prada, that book, first time author. She sold it for like $1 million. I was just like, it's insane, right? Like, what is going on here? The most surreal thing, all the worst things just happened to me, and this is happening to me now. So they gave me the choice. Which one do you want to do? And I went to a deeper core within myself to say, what would I do without regret? And in the end, like in reflection, it was what was I going to do that was based on my values and what's important to me, and never look with regret and in hindsight. So I decided to go with a book because I hadn't even finished writing it yet. And I know like studios can just take your, your material and just do whatever they want. And in the end, nothing happened. The book didn't sell. It almost sold. It didn't. Like, it was just kind of like, just almost there. And then I went back to the studio type of scenario, and that opportunity wasn't there anymore. So in some ways, that was like the best mistake I made, because I went with my, laurels, but it was also the worst because it was just like, how could it come to that point and not have anything happen of it? But I learned so much from it, which was why I think that was my best mistake to learn from, because I finally knew that I had some talent in writing. And even though, Asian American like upbringing, you're not supposed to be doing this stuff for a living. I was like, oh, well, there's a glimmer of hope there. And it made me understand in my own personal lows of that happening, that there's actually more that I can look forward to.
Wow. So just to recap, so there was kind of a hard offer on the movie. You said, no, I want to pursue the book thing. And then that didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, all these offers, like, I don't know how, if you can say hard or soft, because it's all like in a conversation
Sure.
And, who knows what happens. And that's at the point where, because of all these variables, I went back to the core of myself. It's just like, who do I trust? What do I believe within myself of what I wanted to do? And at that point, I just really wanted to write this book because I just had that story to tell. And I went with that. And so many people along the way are just like, oh, you made the wrong choice. Like, obviously, you should have went with the movie deal. And I, in hindsight, I could have, but I actually, because of that core balance within my values, I have never looked back with regret with that one.
Yeah. So were you happy with how the book turned out? Did you have an opportunity to self-publish it, or has it sat?
It's sat, yeah. I mean, who knows, maybe now there might be some interest because with this other book that just came out. But I mean, it kind of hurts, and it hurt for a while to have it sitting on the shelf, because I just poured so much of myself into it. And I really believe that was like what happened during that time in just a realistic way. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. It's an interesting reflection, because I think, as you were alluding to some people, the story would have been the mistake was turning down the deal or turning down the sure thing. And that's not at all what I hear you saying. That the decision and the path there reinforced your thoughts about following your values. It sounds like it didn't make you question that. It wasn't a mistake to follow what felt right for you. Fair to say?
Yeah, totally. Perfect insight on that one, because I thought long and hard about how to answer this kind of questions, because I think for many people, we all don't want to live with regret. And it's one of the things that we've seen all these studies of people, on their deathbeds, and, they ask, and what do you regret? And it's just these things that are just so fundamental to them, of being happy, not working as much, spending time with people they love. And number one answer has generally been being true to yourself. And in that moment, as painful as it was to like saw this, really bright light of like, oh wow, there's a future in this, and then have it all gone while I was laid off. It was a dark time, but it made me feel like I was at least doing the things that were most important to me and being authentic to myself.
Yeah. And then so I'm curious if you've helped fill in a gap between that time and starting Zappos in 2003. Was Zappos the kind of environment then where you could do things where you're being true to yourself and kind of continuing that path?
Yeah. So basically that gap was I just started doing independent consulting, and like I came from the internet background as a strategist, et cetera. And so that's like approximately around, well, 99 is when I met Tony, and he just became CEO of Zappos. Mm-hmm. And so he just started saying, you want to do this project, you want to do this project. And he wanted me to, join Zappos, but I was not in a place where I wanted to join anything, because I'm like, I got to be me, and I got to be independent, and back to the values, be free. So through that process was just as Zappos was growing, I started growing with them, and it eventually went from different projects to Culture and the Culture book, and then eventually Delivering Happiness, the book, launching that with Tony in 2010, and then here we are now.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear then how this idea of being true to yourself ties into the book. And again, the title is Beyond Happiness, and the subtitle talks about authentic leaders. Like, what are some of the other lessons learned that you hope others would take away from your story and what you're sharing in the book as well?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's like, there's so many things that I went through in terms of trying to understand where this book needed to go, and eventually naming it Beyond Happiness, because the perception of happiness, everyone has their sort of like, instant things or thoughts or images of what that looks like, rainbows and unicorns for some, and other variations for others. And that's all natural and good. I mean, happiness has been around for a couple, over 2,000 years of Aristotle saying like happiness is the purpose of our existence, and happiness is dependent on ourselves. So I took it upon myself to say, okay, well, where are we now? Because with happiness, and just to backstory a little bit, like it's about scientific happiness, the levers and academic side of what we've pulled from positive psychology and applied it in the workplace. But with this one, why I went beyond happiness is because the authenticity of us as leaders, no matter what role we have or title we have, it comes to not just having and understanding the highs of ourselves, and then therefore extrapolating the sustainable happiness of our lives. It's really actually sitting and being at peace with our lows. So not just our strengths, but our shadow sides, our blind spots, and actually like sitting at the table with them, if not inviting them as friends to who we are as human beings, and therefore leaders at work and in life, is where I was going with the book.
Well, and that mindset of being, kind of comfortable or at ease with setbacks or problems. I mean, that's a lot of the mindset here around the podcast, is being comfortable with learning and growing through mistakes. And, I'm aware of, I'm sure I've made a mistake. I make mistakes every day. Like the day is still relatively early, so I can't think of one I've made today. But I think not being in denial about mistakes is helpful. That sounds like there's a similar train of thought to not being in denial of some of the things that, or at best a springboard to happiness.
Yeah, it's not just the denial part, or like it's basically, we have a tendency of avoidance and sweeping things under the rug, of things that are just like, well, that was just one thing, I've learned from it, I can move on. But have we really learned from it is the question that I'm, prompting through this book, is have we really try to understand, and I have exercises in the book to make it very practical, because it's not all theory unless we do the work, which is the work within ourselves, right? Like, so not just like identifying our highs, but identifying our lows and asking ourselves the same questions for both highs and lows, which is, what values were there or not there, what people were there or not there. And by pulling that out and just taking intentional time to think about those things, you see themes in our life. And that actually builds the authenticity of like, oh, that's who I am. That's what I'm scared of or fearful of, or where my anxiety comes from, or where this trauma might have come from in my life. And then there's also like, oh, that's why I was so happy. And usually it's not about the money, title, status. Usually it's something so intrinsic in you, in us, that only we can define. And that's what we stick to in terms of that core, whether high or low.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, when we talk about defining, I mean, is happiness defined differently by different people? I mean, some people may value, they may think the money is happiness, or maybe that defined as happiness to them, or maybe they, I don't know, this will sound harsh, like they don't understand what happiness is.
In the end, yeah, it's a very subjective definition, but that's why we go by to the science of it and going by the philosophy and the academic side of what we've seen. And to kind of, I guess, summarize it, happiness based on those terms and research is, number one, knowing your intrinsic disposition in life, which is self-awareness. And then the second thing is your pleasures. We all need it. Like, don't get me wrong. I mean, I've got champagne on my back here. So
there's a poster for those who are just listening. There's a great poster that Jenn has behind her about champagne that I noticed. Yeah.
It's just like, basically, does running out of champagne count as cardio? And for me, for the last 18 plus months, definitely. And then, so that's the pleasure or hedonic side. And then the third part of happiness is the eudaimonistic side, and that's an Aristotle thing, which is the meaning of our lives. Like, what are we doing that's bigger than ourselves? So I think happiness is subjective because we all define it for ourselves. But given the research behind it, those are the three components of, like, if we really want to be real about how we define happiness, those are the factors to consider on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And then going back to the subtitle of the book, you talk again. I'll just read it off. Beyond happiness, how authentic leaders. We've kind of touched on being authentic. The next part here: prioritizing purpose and people for growth and impact. So what I take away, even just from the subtitle, is more of a focus on purpose and our people leads to more growth, more impact. What would you say about that?
Yeah, and just as a reminder, I wrote this before this great resignation. Like, I did not know this was going to last this long. I just knew from the experiences I've had around the world of people and companies and now hospitals and governments, like, embedding these kind of concepts of sustainable happiness into the organization, you see significant shifts in not just the outcomes and the productivity and engagement, and therefore productivity towards profits for for-profit companies, but within people. And that shift in people is what I was alluding to. Like, the more we as leaders can be vulnerable and to our highs and lows of what, like, we can't imagine everyone having a great day. Like, it's going to be crappy days, and we've seen a lot of it. So the more we show up as ourselves to that point, the more everyone else feels like they can as well. And that's when you get people staying or, wanting to be even more loyal and working harder because there's a greater goal that you're aligned with, from a personal side to the leadership side, and then obviously laddering up to the organization and business side of things. So that was pretty interesting to see it unfold, especially, in the last year, when millions of people are quitting, even though they don't have another job lined up. And so with this whole thing of, like, leaders saying, how do we retain people and how do we prevent burnout? These are the concepts of, basically, let's just be real, number one, as leaders, and be real with our people and ask them, hey, what's going on? And actually listen. And not to say that we can solve all the problems, but we can be there to, as I say, be a mirror, not the mechanic.
So be the mirror, not the mechanic. Say more.
Yeah,
That's another interesting phrase. Tell us a little bit more about that. Is that what I think it might mean is kind of just absorbing and reflecting what someone is sharing as opposed to trying to fix them.
exactly. Yes. And that includes ourselves, mirror to ourselves and mirrors to people that are part of our team, people that we lead, people even in our lives. Like, this has been really cool to see how this has been applied in family settings too. Just, this is like, we've had so much time to sit in our own spaces with deep reflection, and to know that everyone is doing it this at the same time is such an opportune time and place in our lives to hold that mirror, ask the questions that we're asking ourselves, and just be a good listener.
Mm-hmm.
And with that empathy, and treating people like the whole person, not just their skill set or responsibilities, or their role, but where are they mentally? Where are they emotionally? Where are they financially? Like, again, we don't have to solve everything, but at least having that dialogue, then everyone feels more whole, and that they feel that they can be more authentic.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jenn, I did want to ask you about the Great Resignation. There was a record high number of Americans who quit their jobs in August, and you do the math, it's like 3.6% of the workforce. So, I mean, that's a pretty high percentage of people to be quitting in a month. And those quit rates have, I mean, if you go back and look at the data, like there's a 10-year trend going back to after the last Great Recession. Mm-hmm. Like it's gone from like 2 million a month quitting on average to 4 million a month now. How much of that, I mean, there's longer trends, but with the pandemic, how much do you think how often are people reflecting on questions of purpose and what do I want to do with my life? And what is my legacy going to be? I mean, how much of that is leading to job change, do you think?
I think that it's been, I mean, a huge indicator, one of so many data points as to the fact that people are quitting. And as I mentioned before, with even like not even jobs lined up next. Mm-hmm. And there's all these different, there's different hypotheses as to why this is happening. Oh, I need more flex hours. I need more pay. I'm not going to give into this anymore. I need to take care of my kids. But a big factor of all this, in addition to all that, is that people are just looking for more meaning and just having that sense of purpose. And it's not to say that it's impossible when you're working for, like, you're a food runner, or you're for Uber Eats or Uber or whatever. It's not to say those people cannot get in touch with purpose, because they can. And from what I've seen, by having these kind of authentic leadership dialogues, that's when you really can invite that honesty and transparency and vulnerability in a way that they can feel purposeful. Because at the end of the day, they're not saying, oh, like my purpose is to deliver food. Their purpose is like, I probably, I want to take care of my kids. I want to take care of my spouse or a partner. And when you tap into that and say, okay, well, I want to help you do that too. That's when those connections happen, and this great resignation, great awakening, great reset, great insert any term you want, because we're living in it right now. That's when the change happens in a fully humanistic way.
Mm-hmm. So one other thing you touch on in the book, I was curious to ask you about, looking at kind of the future of work. We've been in a shift here of working from home, and some people now it's a hybrid workplace or hybrid meetings. You talk about hybrid and human. How do you kind of explain that in terms of the new future, or what's to come in the future around work?
Hybrid so. Well, I talk about the future of work being, because future work has always been associated with technology, AI, AR, and like all of a sudden the future of work is now essentially what we're living. And so I counterbalance that out, because we all associate the future work being so technology driven, but my like the concept I bring in the book is that it's equally as human as well. And why I say that is that there's always going to be need for what humans can bring that technology cannot, if we choose to see it that way. So the fact that we can be empathetic, we can be creative, we can be innovative, we can actually analyze problems with an emotional sense of what that could mean, that stuff can never be replaced with what the future work of technology can bring. So I think the more as we as leaders can recognize that, and now we're seeing it, whether it's like Microsoft, Google, Starbucks, like Starbucks was a client for like 4 years in terms of like them really recognizing, wait, there isn't just a profit a push in all this. There's something that we need to reinvest in. And that's why I think it's so promising to see these major companies reinvesting, millions, if not billions of dollars, going back to reskilling or finding the right fit, and actually going back to the core of who we are as human beings. And that's why I feel like it's so promising to remember the future of work is not just the tech stuff. It's not digital. It's actually human as well.
Well, a couple questions, and I'm kind of thinking of, Steve Blank and lean startup mindsets of like, can you build something and should you build something? Can you automate something? Like here in Southern California, in some cities, downtown Santa Monica, you see these little tiny food delivery robots. You talking about people delivering food made me thinking about this. Like that can be automated. How will that play out in terms of should they be automating? But I think of like the domain I work of mostly in hospitals and healthcare as a consultant there. Food delivery to patients has traditionally been done of somebody pushing carts down a hallway and bringing a cart in and with a smile and checking on the patient. They're not doing so in a purely clinical way, but they could flag down a nurse if their eyes see the patient is struggling. And there are some hospitals that have started automating the delivery of supplies or food on these automated carts. And I always come back to the question of, well, should they be automating that, right? Like a cart going down the hall can't smile at people. Like a person can't stop a cart to ask for directions because they're lost, which happens all the time in hospitals. How would you think through? I know these are some, big picture questions of, can we automate it versus should we automate it? When should we tap into the humanistic abilities?
Yeah, I think that there's the organizational design of things that's important to know, because one of the things that we ask ourselves with any company, let alone a hospital, and I'll share an example just in a sec, but is what is our why? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why is this organization being run? For hospitals, we're supposed to make patients feel comfortable, healthier, et cetera. What we're also trying to do with hospitals, we're just going to stick to that, is that we're also trying to make our care teams strong, resilient, and healthy too. So if we can think about it that way, start with the why of reorganizing ourselves so that it's laddering up to that, then it's okay to automate. It makes that question that much easier. It doesn't mean like swipe everyone out that can be automated, because there's so Northwell Health is one of our clients. Like they done an amazing job over the last since COVID. They actually increased their level. Like they went from I forgot the number off the top of my head, but they went to the number 2 hospital of best places to work in the US. And that's pretty incredible, like during this time. And it's because they instilled a sense of purpose and values. Like they went through this whole program. This is our purpose. They reminded everyone of it, from their doctors to the nurses to the custodians. And they were accountable by living a culture of care, which is their acronym of what they need to do for their patients and therefore each other. So a quick story on that, like a custodian, to that point, like, can that be automated? But one of the patients of Northwell, when he was leaving, he was telling his son, I loved my time there. And his son was just bewildered. Like, how can, like, he wasn't even that well. And he's like, because Louise actually came in every day and gave me the sports section, and we talked about the Mets.
Yeah.
And that was it. Yeah. And so I think if we can look at it that way, then we can design organizations of like what can be automated, and therefore make sure the staff and the health and medical teams are healthy and, from a well-being perspective, especially, and resilient, and can be taking care of our patients as well.
Yeah. That's very well said. Maybe one last question for you, Jenn. And again, the title of the book is Beyond Happiness. We've been talking about workplace decisions and workplace happiness, but what are some of your thoughts about how to bring values-based decisions into our daily lives, not just work scenarios?
Yeah. This is one of my favorites because it starts from, as I say in the book, it starts from the me. And even if we're in a situation at work where we have to be there, so to speak, because of we need to get paid, we need to pay our bills. I mean, those are very common situations. But once we actually do the work on ourselves of going through these exercises of, what is it that's most meaningful to me? What are my values that I really want to hold near and dear to? Like, for example, because I lost my dad, because I lost Tony, and because I, went through other highs that were amazing, I realized it was people, it's autonomy, it's being free, and it's being myself. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty amazing. It sounds like oversimplified, but once I had that tentpole, I knew that every decision I made, I would never look back with regret. And I think that's where we can all start from in our lives. And what's really cool too is that I have goddaughters, nephews, and nieces, but my family, my brothers, they do it with their kids. Like my brother shares values, and I ask them what their values are, and they build on that, and they have a shared sense of values and shared sense of purpose. And that unit, becomes that much more connected, because it's so much more meaningful and becomes a constant dialogue. So I think it's really cool to start with the me and then do it within our relationships.
The me, the why, and then extending to our relationships, or then back in a workplace standpoint, extending that to our colleagues, our employees, our business partners.
Yeah, as I say, sorry to cut you off, but
that's right.
Just the framing in the book is the me to the we to community. And
there you go.
Whether it's personal or workplace, I think we can all sort of insert what that means for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, good. Well, I hope people will check that out. Again, the book, Beyond Happiness, How Authentic Leaders Prioritize Purpose and People for Growth and Impact. Jenn Lim is the author, and she's been our guest here today. JennLim.com is her website. So Jenn, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story. And again, congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks for the insightful questions.